But let's talk to Dr. Rakib Ehsan from the Centre on Radicalisation and Terrorism at the Henry Jackson Society. Rakib has been very much on the forefront of commenting and making statements about the Shamima Begum case. Rakib, a very good morning to you. Welcome back.
Morning, Mike. How are you?
Yeah, very well indeed. Disturbed, I suppose, as many people in this country have been at the news yesterday when it broke. It broke on this show, as so many stories do, that the judges in the appeal court have decided that the Home Office was entirely wrong to strip her of her British citizenship, and she should be allowed back here to fight that particular decision.
Well, Mike, I think needless to say, much of the British public will be extremely disappointed by the court ruling. I did previously write before and comment before that in terms of stripping her citizenship, that the Home Secretary at the time, who was Sajid Javid, that he was perhaps providing the appearance that he was looking to shift Shamima Begum onto Bangladesh. Now, this is a country that she's never set foot in. He was convinced that he had he was operating within the boundaries of legal frameworks, relevant legal frameworks, in doing so. So, of course, needless to say, the perception of the judiciary at the moment, which I previously criticised on a range of terrorism and extremism related matters, where I have felt that how do you say, woolly liberal judges have all too often prioritised the rights of extremists, people who have been convicted of terrorism related offences. They've tended to prioritise that over broader public safety. And I think that perception is only solidifying among notable sections of British society.
Yeah, I mean, the Guardian reading fraternity are all over this, aren't they? Saying how terrible it was that she was groomed as a 15-year-old to go out and join ISIS because she thought it was some kind of glamorous crusade, and she thought that it was almost like going to a pop concert. I don't believe that. You wrote a piece last year saying you don't believe it, that she's not a victim. She knew precisely what she was doing. There's plenty of 15-year-olds who know precisely what they're doing, and it's nonsense to pretend that she, who has, after all, admitted that she loved the husband that she married. She didn't care about the fact that he murdered people, or that she found a severed head in a bin, or that people were burned literally in cages around her, and she was quite happy to take part in all that.
Well, Mike, firstly, I think that we have to call out victimhood narratives surrounding Shamima Begum.
Right.
I think the reality of the matter is the piece that you've stated there. I made the point that the age of criminal responsibility in England and Wales is 10.
Right.
She was 5 years above that when she ran off to join, in my view, a genocidal terrorist organisation. And the reality of the matter is, if you are going to use age as a defence, you do a grave disservice to 15-year-old girls who live in the UK of Bangladeshi Muslim origin. All they really want to do is work hard at school, do their families proud. So I feel that we should be very careful when it comes to these, not just very careful, to be honest, we should be robustly challenging these victimhood narratives surrounding Shamima Begum.
Yes, exactly right. And I mean, what is it about these kind of people who seem to have the public opinion in this country so wrong, but they make out that they're superior to everybody else. They know better than everybody else. None of these people would want to have Shamima Begum or any of her family living anywhere near them, and yet they want us to pay for her to sue us and to get recompense and probably compensation out of the public funds.
Well, Mike, I've said it before, there's no room for virtue signalling when it comes to matters of national security and counter-extremism.
Yeah.
For me, I think looking at this particular case, I think that these narratives are that she was groomed, that she's a victim. As I said, it does a grave disservice to British citizens her age who would fundamentally reject any kind of extremist advance. People who do simply want to work hard, be a valuable member of British society. So I think that we should be really careful when we're having these kind of discussions. And as I've stated previously, we have too many people in positions of power and influence in public institutions who all too often prioritise the rights of people who break British law. They join organizations which, in my view, are intent on destroying Western civilization. They prioritize their rights, and ultimately, all too often, they do not prioritize broader public safety and community stability.
Right. And I mean, one of the other problems here, Rakib, is that there are other people who will be encouraged by this ruling, presumably, who are also still stuck in refugee camps, either in Turkey or northern Syria, who are also people who went to join ISIS and who would like to now find a passage back to the UK.
Well, I think, needless to say, that there is a risk of that. I think that when we are looking at this particular case, I think when you look at the Home Secretary at the time, Sajid Javid, I think he tried to do what he can
Hmm.
in the situation he found himself in. But I think the debate really needs to move forwards in terms of how do we manage these kind of situations going into the future. Now, one thing, Mike, the threats, the various threats that the UK faces, they are constantly changing, they are evolving, and that needs to be reflected in a modernisation of treason laws.
Yes. And Sajid Javid made a statement yesterday in which he more or less kind of condemned what the appeal court judges had said. I mean, my take on this is not that the Home Office should go to the Supreme Court and appeal this, that the Home Office should simply say, look, I'm terribly sorry, this woman is no longer a citizen of the United Kingdom. She has no rights here. She has no ability to claim any sort of legal aid. My understanding is her lawyer has already creamed off about 15 grand in legal aid fees, right? He's already in the pay of the public purse in order to try and get her back here. We don't want her. She's not of any use to us, and she's not a citizen of this country.
Mike, I think in terms of just moving the discussion in a slightly different direction, I think that when we've seen the kind of victimhood narratives that we've already discussed, is the idea that public institutions did not do enough to prevent Shamima Begum from running off to Islamic State. All too often, the police will be blamed, the local council will be blamed. Ultimately, we need to be talking about family responsibility here.
Yeah.
I think that needs to be part of the debate, Mike, if I'm being completely honest. I think all too often when you're looking at these kind of cases, a range of public authorities are criticised. Oh, why didn't you prevent this person from leaving the UK? Why were they allowed to travel to these problematic parts of the world? When really we should be looking at the bread and butter sort of, family level considerations here.
Mm.
I think all too often people are looking to shift the blame elsewhere. There's a great deal of accountability shedding. I think we need to have a very serious debate about how we produce and how we move towards a more robust counter-extremism approach. And that involves having some very admittedly sensitive discussions over issues such as family dynamics, community
Mm.
circumstances, because all too often I feel that with these victimhood narratives, it's about shifting the blame elsewhere. And I think personal responsibility has to come into it as well. As I've mentioned already, when Shamima Begum ran off to join an organization which is ultimately intent on destroying Western civilization, the UK is very much part of that.
Yeah.
There's all this idea, although she was only 15. These are the same people who'd also want to lower the voting age to 16.
Right. Yeah,
So,
and they're also the people that want us to listen to Greta Thunberg, who tells us all about how climate change is ruining the world, and because she's old enough to know how much more than we do. But the bottom line as well, Rakib, is it not the case that her father, Shamima Begum's father, now lives back in Bangladesh? He was also
indeed.
a fairly radical individual. There are pictures of him at various radical protests. I'm not saying that makes him a bad guy, but it certainly puts the onus on him as a man who may have actually helped to radicalise her.
Well, I think firstly we should be careful in terms of over speculating, you could say, but I think you make a very good point. As we know, that Shamima Begum's dad is actually based in Bangladesh.
Right.
So that makes the point I'm making there is that family dynamics needs to be part of the discussion when we're talking about counter extremism.
Yeah.
Now, all too often we're talking about, we hear representatives of Shamima Begum talking about, oh, why didn't the public authorities do this a bit more? Why didn't they monitor this a bit more closely? But this for me, Mike, this is really very much shifting responsibility
Mm.
and accountability.
Right.
And as I said, personal responsibility has to come into it because, as I've said before, there are girls in this country, Mike, with a very similar background to Shamima Begum in terms of her ethnic origin and her religious background, who would not have dreamt of doing what she did, Mike. And that needs to be part of the debate, which
Mm.
is why when people try to use her age as a defense, I think that you're playing a very risky game there.
No, I think that's absolutely right. And just finally, in terms of, what happens next, if you like, I would imagine that there's going to be a lot of sort of, breast beating going on inside the Home Office. They're going to be worried about whether this will create a whole sort of floodgate situation and more people taking the government to court. We've seen too many times in the past these miscreants, people who are terrorists, people who are enemies of the state, literally using our state-funded legal system to fight against the state which has condemned them for being terrorists in the first place.
Okay, one thing that I'll say there, Mike, is that for too long, our political leaders, they've been sleeping at the wheel.
Yeah.
On these kind of matters. As I previously stated, we need a fundamental modernisation of treason laws which reflect the main threats that this country faces in terms of extremism. And the reality of the matter is we do have a judicial system where there are, how do you say, there's a section of woolly liberal judges who all too often prioritise the human rights of people who, quite frankly, don't respect the human rights of others.
No.
And I think that in response to that, we have political leaders, we have a conservative government. They should respond to that, because the reality of the matter is I would feel, in my view, there is a growing public perception that this country has become a soft touch on these kind of issues. And I think politicians, they should respond to that.
And also, because we've been in lockdown for the last 3 months, we've had a bit of a break, if you like, from the radicalisation and the sort of lone wolf terrorist attacks that we saw relatively recently, both here at London Bridge, down in Streatham, other places as well, over in Reading. We've got this problem with people in this country, for one rule or another, for one reason or another, who hate this country and who want to do harm to people who live here. How confident are you that we're still keeping an eye on as many of these people as possible?
Well, I think, Mike, you make a very good point there. There's actually growing evidence. I've actually published a report on this for the Henry Jackson Society, which is actually looking at how extremists are looking to exploit the COVID-19 pandemic to further their hateful narratives, looking to, how do you say, encourage people to commit acts of violence. And that includes Islamic State. Islamic State has produced communication instructing jihadists to conduct terrorist attacks in the West, because they feel that our public authorities, because they are so preoccupied with managing the COVID-19 pandemic, they see countries such as the UK as vulnerable, and they see this as an opportune time for their jihadists to strike. So public authorities, the relevant counter-extremism, counter-terrorism agencies, they really need to be on the ball in terms of how extremists, while we look at the COVID-19 pandemic as a crisis, the mainstream is deeply worried about it, they're concerned. We have extremists who actually see it as a golden opportunity to carry out destructive terrorist attacks at a time where people, they're deeply anxious, they are concerned, and they might even look to exploit those anxieties in order to sow seeds of social division, disrupt social cohesion, and ultimately carry out terrorist attacks. So I really do hope the public authorities are very much on the ball on this front.
Well, let's hope so. Dr. Rakib Ehsan, thank you very much indeed. Henry Jackson Society, of course, from the Centre on Radicalisation and Terrorism. We don't want Shamima Begum coming back here. We certainly don't want her spending any money that we would provide through legal aid for her to fight her case. We certainly don't think that she needs to be here to do that. I mean, everybody else has been meeting on Zoom. Why can't she meet on Zoom from wherever it is she is, if that's what she wants to do? But this government should simply just outlaw the idea that she can in any way challenge the stripping of her citizenship. How about this from Peter? He says, may I say, proof that Western women joining ISIS were made to show their loyalty by committing atrocities such as executing prisoners, etc. And I quote from a source, some of these women were absolutely barbaric and ruthless. And that's what we know. And we don't really need to show any mercy to these people.